Assalamu alaikum. I am Ahmed Ramadan for Muslim Network TV. Today we have a very special guest. David Heap is a spokesperson for the Canadian boat to Gaza, part of the Freedom Flotilla coalition. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your show, Ahmed. Very happy to be here with you today.
So is there a particular incident or moment where you felt like the Canadian government and governments in general around the world are not doing enough that motivated you to take up this cause?
Well, in my personal case, it actually dates from 2008, Cast Lead, when the Canadian government supported the Harper government for us. It was the Netanyahu government in Israel, in occupied Palestine, beginning, if you like, the assault against Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And it's just been building ever since. So at that time, some of us in London occupied a member of parliament's office. We were inspired by friends in Toronto. There's a group of Jewish and Israeli women who occupied the Israeli consulate. We decided we didn't have an Israeli consulate in London. We occupied conservative members of parliament because they were acting, quite frankly, like Israel's diplomacy in Canada. So we did that, and from there we joined, our local group in London joined the Gaza Freedom March in 2009-10. And shortly after that, there was the Marmara, which mobilized a lot of people. There were a few Canadians on board, but we very quickly decided we had to form a Canadian Boat to Gaza campaign in 2010 and join the Freedom Flotilla efforts. And I've been with it ever since.
Planning a voyage like this isn't just logistical, it's political, it's emotional, even spiritual. What goes into preparing yourself and your team for the likelihood of interception, detention, or even worse?
Absolutely. And particularly if you think of the context of 2010, when we started the Canadian Boat to Gaza and joined the flotilla, and 2011, when we sailed for the first time with the Tahrir, a Canadian boat which had on board Australians, Belgians, Danes as well, and an international crew. The preparation is everything from spreadsheets and logistics, fundraising and technical stuff. There's translators, there's engineers involved. There's artists and musicians involved in creating awareness and spreading the word. But for the people who actually get on board, there is a lot of preparation as well. As you say, people have to be prepared in their own minds for facing the violence of the occupying Navy, and knowing that our own governments are complicit. Our own governments give the Israeli occupation forces complete immunity. They won't hold them to account for their violence, their daily severe violence against Palestinian civilians, and frankly, against internationals as well. So we know that our government is complicit through its silence, complicit in its acts, complicit by continuing to support and arm the occupation forces of the Israeli military. So we know that we're acting at the same time against the blockade in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Palestinian waters of Gaza, and also against the political and media blockade in our own country. And there is a lot of preparation, as you say, both for the organizations and the individuals involved. We prepare our crew and the people on board for nonviolent resistance, for not responding in any way that could give the commandos who assault our vessels any more excuse to respond violently. I was sailing the year after, in 2011, the year after the Mavi Marmara, where 10 people were killed and dozens were injured by the Israeli commandos. We weren't, but we saw tasers used in my case, but we had to be prepared for the worst. And so people have to have that mindset when they go into it, that we are taking a small part of the violence that is, as I say, is inflicted daily on Palestinian civilians in occupied Palestine, in occupied Gaza, and the rest of occupied Palestine.
It's a very brave endeavor. We spoke to somebody also that was part of the March to Gaza, which also put themselves at risk. So a lot of people have not been able to just sit back and watch what's taking place unfold. They wanted to take some real action. However, I want to say that some people say flotillas like this are just symbolic, but symbols have toppled empires. What's your response to that critique?
Symbolism matters, but concrete action matters as well. So if we were simply saying symbolically, there should be food, baby formula, medicine reaching the Palestinians of Gaza, that would be symbolic. But if we say we're actually willing to put ourselves on the line, our bodies on the line, our boats on the line. I mean, I forgot to say, when I said spreadsheets, think of a lot of fundraising. I've never been involved in an organization that raised the cost of a boat before, but now we see people are very generous in donating, but there's a lot of paperwork that we involved in collecting donations and buying a boat. But ultimately, the scale of the need is the scale that will require international aid from large NGOs. We're not a large NGO. We can't respond to the level of need that Palestinians in Gaza have with the terrible famine, human-made, deliberate, triggered famine planned by the Israeli occupation. We can't respond to that. It needs to be international organizations like UNRWA. UNRWA exists at the scale for dealing with the support for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. But what we can do is call to the conscience of the world and the conscience of our governments to say it's unacceptable to make an occupied people who are already the object of genocide, to make them subject to the whims of their occupier to decide how to control aid getting in. It just doesn't make sense to say we have an occupying military state which has declared its intention to take all of Gaza, which has declared its intention to ethnically cleanse Gaza, which has declared its intention in many cases to wipe out the Palestinians of Gaza, and say, you know what, you also get to control international aid to these people. Our governments need to say no. That state is a rogue state. It's a criminal state. It's up on charges at the International Court of Justice. The international community needs to have a people's corridor to bring the aid to Palestinians of Gaza that they need without subjecting it to the control of the occupier. Until the states do that, until our governments do what they have to do, citizens organizations, people's organizations like ours have to step up and show the way. And we know from history that when leaders fail to lead, people lead, eventually our political leaders follow.
So you mentioned this a few times, but you obviously believe that the Canadian government has not done enough. What else do you want them to do?
Well, we know that the Canadian government has sometimes nice words, but also often says they support Israel's, quote, right to defend itself, end quote. The fact is, in international law, no state has the right to defend itself in an illegal occupation. So it doesn't have, in fact, have the right to defend, quote unquote, defend itself against Palestinians who do have the right to resist occupation. But beyond that, Canada has to stop arming the occupation. We know there's a recent report we've been seeing for months that Canada claims to have ended military exports, but in fact, there are many military exports from Canada that go to arm the occupation military. Canada also buys stuff from the Israeli military and the Israeli arms trade, which supports the occupation by enriching them. So Canada must stop buying from Israel, in particular from the Israeli arms trades. For example, there's a multi-billion-dollar contract of Elbit drones. These are the same drones that are used to surveil the flotilla boats. They're the same drones which are used to surveil Palestinian civilians in the West Bank and in Gaza and kill people in their tents. Mothers feeding their children in tents are killed by Israeli drones, and we're supporting that by buying their drones. So this has to end. Canada must have a two-way arms embargo. Nothing in, nothing to Israel, nothing from Israel. More generally, end all the illegal commerce with the occupation military and the occupation forces. And beyond that, this recent action, I mean, it's ludicrous that Canada has joined once again. I mean, they're a late joiner, right? So they joined the late after France and the UK, saying we will recognize, and they want to put conditions on it, recognize the Palestinian state. And then they joined in this international effort to airdrop food packages into Gaza with the Jordanian military. Again, this is controlled by, permitted by, framed by the occupier. The occupier military says what can go in, when it can go in, where it can go in. This is not acceptable. No other occupied people is supposed to give control to the illegal occupier over when they can receive food. Palestinians have the right to say, we must receive the aid we want, the trade we want, the travel we want, when we need it, where we need it, how we need it. This is an issue of human rights. It's an issue of human sovereignty. Palestinians must control their own fate, and that includes controlling the aid that arrives to them. Now, most of it won't arrive by sea. It's not a great access. Our boats are small. Even bigger boats would have trouble bringing in all the stuff that's needed. We know that under the previous blockade, there were like 500 trucks a day needed to supply the population of Gaza. Those trucks have to come in either through the Israeli crossings or through the Rafah crossing into Egypt. That's where most of the supplies have to come in, but they have to come in without the control of the occupier. That's what Canada has to demand. So these ridiculous airdrops, first of all, we know that they're often accidents. They either fall in the sea and can't be recovered, or they fall in a dangerous place and they hurt people by falling, or they're stolen when they land on the ground by people who shouldn't be getting them. It's an uncontrolled and quite frankly, if you want to talk about symbolism, a ridiculous symbol of fake humanitarianism, fig leaf humanitarianism, almost as bad as the so-called GHF, the genocide humanitarian fig leaf, which lures starving people with a little bit of food aid and then has the contractor mercenaries or the Israeli occupation forces open fire on them. This is not a humanitarian way to deliver aid, either by airdrops or the GHF. A humanitarian way to deliver aid is through UN organizations like UNRWA, through channels which are not controlled by the military occupation. So our effort is a very small effort, which is political, as you said at the beginning. It's political intent to denounce the blockade, to denounce our government's complicity, and to insist that Palestinians have the right to control the aid that they need and their people deserve.
Yeah, we've even seen now top human rights organizations in Israel, like B'Tselem, demanding or calling for intervention with what's taking place. So the situation obviously on the ground is really bad. Israelis aren't even trying to hide the fact that they're trying to ethnically cleanse Gaza, that they're trying to starve Gaza. So it's been very difficult for the people there and for us on the outside watching them, day after day, month after month. What does it say to you when you see such little, if any, coverage of what you're doing and your team is doing from both the media and also the lack of care from government officials when these things unfold in international waters and international law taking place, as Canadians in support of a country that has been pretty much by every mainstream human rights organization calling what's taking place a genocide?
As I said before, our leaders don't lead. Our leaders follow. When the people lead, the leaders eventually follow. I say that not because it's just, a phrase or a slogan. We observe that. I'm old enough, you can't tell, but there's some gray in my beard. I'm old enough to remember the last apartheid. In the 80s, the governments did not lead in denouncing and eventually toppling apartheid South Africa. It was people's organizations, as you say, human rights organizations, B'Tselem, but before that, Palestinian human rights organizations, international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty were ahead of governments, but especially grassroots organizations, faith groups, congregations of different kinds. In Canada, now we have Independent Jewish Voices, for example, that supports our efforts. Supports the flotilla and supports BDS against the Israeli state. Trade unions lead the way, human rights organizations lead the way, and eventually governments follow. So on our boats, on our flotilla boats, we have had, in the last two, there was this year on the Madeleine, there was Rima Hassan, a French member of European Parliament, and on the last boat, there was a French member of Parliament, member of the National Assembly, Gabriel Catala, and Emily Fourreau, another Eurodepute, another member of European Parliament. They send European countries, and it's the same. We've had Irish politicians that sailed at the same time as I did. There have been politicians from Aotearoa, New Zealand, from the Green Party, others from the Spanish, others from European countries. They send politicians because their politicians realize their electors, their voters demand that they step up for Palestine. They're not doing it. They're good people. I'm not trying to reduce the credit due to the politicians that take these risks, but they take these risks knowing that their electors demand a better representation and a better position on Palestine. So when we demand better of our politicians, they will step up. On the last sailing, I'm happy to say a couple of members of parliament spoke up. They spoke up in favor of Handala. They spoke up in favor of delivering humanitarian aid to Palestinians without the control of the occupier. That's a first step. We've had other retired politicians in Canada get on board, but I'm very happy to say that some sitting politicians in Canada have got on board. In Quebec Solitaire, their whole caucus is with us in terms of opposing the occupation and supporting sovereignty for Palestine. So things are beginning to
David,
shift.
just because we're running out of time, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to say what's next for your organization and what message do you have for the viewers watching?
So the Freedom Flotilla Coalition will continue to sail. We're a grassroots organization in 15 countries. Others have decided to sail as well. That's great. We support all efforts to oppose the blockade and to support the liberation of Palestinians in Gaza and throughout Palestine. We will sail again in September. I can't tell you more details than that, but let's say that more Freedom Flotilla Coalition sailings are due soon. And whether you support us or one of the other efforts, the main thing that people need, your listeners should think about, is to get engaged on some level. As I said, if we demand better of our politicians, if we demand better of our media, already, if they're listening to your independent media, that's much better than the mainstream media. But we have to demand better stories on the mainstream media and say, hey, cover this sailing, cover these people, cover especially the stories of Palestinians under occupation. If we demand better, eventually the media will follow. Eventually the politicians will follow. But it starts with us. It starts with you and me and our viewers, the folks listening to us, demanding the truth about these stories and demanding that people listen to the truth about Palestinians under occupation.
You're absolutely right. This is part of the effort that we're doing here at MNTV, where we're trying to tell stories independently, more nuanced stories that are not being told by the mainstream media, but also, like you said, we should be asking better from the mainstream media, from our politicians, and it starts with us. David, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ahmed, for the opportunity.
And this is Ahmed Ramadan for Muslim Network TV with a special interview. Please stay tuned for more and let us know in the comments what else you would like us to cover and your thoughts. Assalamu alaikum.